Phocoustic is a physics-anchored symbolic measurement architecture developed to explore a different path in machine perception. Rather than focusing exclusively on recognition and classification, the platform measures physical state changes, directional instability, and evolving signal structures within visual data. Over multiple generations of research, experimentation, and prototype development, the architecture has expanded from anomaly detection towards state conformance, industrial measurement, and physics-informed analysis. Supported by an extensive patent portfolio, international filings, and tens of thousands of lines of implementation code, Phocoustic represents an ongoing effort to bridge signal science, engineering measurement, and next-generation intelligence systems. Before we dive deeper into the technology, it's worth taking a moment to explain the Phocoustic logo. The logo reflects one of the earliest ideas that inspired the project. The original concept explored whether visual information could be transformed into an acoustic-style representation, organized into structured sequences, and then interpreted by artificial intelligence. Over time, the architecture evolved far beyond that initial concept. The system ultimately became focused on physics-anchored measurement, directional drift analysis, and symbolic state representation. But the logo remains a reminder of that original insight. The blue waveform represents the physical world being observed. The orange waveform represents transformation, encoding, and interpretation. Together, they symbolize a central theme that still exists today: the conversion of raw physical signals into structured information that can be measured, analyzed, and understood. In many ways, the logo captures the journey that led to Phocoustic itself, from observation to representation to meaning. In most machine vision systems, the primary goal is recognition: identify the object, classify the defect, match the pattern. Phocoustic provides a different possibility. What if visual data could be used to measure physical change itself? In this example, a small modification has been introduced into a circuit board image. The system does not begin by asking what the object is. Instead, it examines how the physical state of the image has changed. Those changes can produce measurable directional structures. Across larger regions, those structures form organized fields that can be visualized as patterns of motion, persistence, and instability. The images shown here are not artist renderings, simulations, or manually created overlays. They are generated from actual experimental processing performed on captured image data. Throughout this presentation, we will examine how physical changes can produce measurable directional fields, how those fields can be transformed into symbolic representations, and how those representations may provide a foundation for a new class of physics-anchored measurement systems. Before discussing the algorithms, patents, or implementation details, consider a simple question. If a physical change occurs, can that change be measured before it becomes obvious to a human observer? That question became the starting point for the Phocoustic architecture. The examples shown throughout this presentation span multiple physical domains, including printed circuit boards, thin films, and semiconductor wafers. Traditional machine vision systems often require separate datasets, retraining cycles, or specialized models as inspection objectives change. Phocoustic approaches this challenge differently. The architecture is designed around configurable measurement profiles that define how inspection behavior should be governed within a particular physical domain. A profile can specify sensitivity to drift, temporal persistence requirements, directional encoding behavior, region of interest priorities, illumination adaptation strategies, and state conformance criteria. These controls allow the measurement process to be adapted to different inspection scenarios without requiring the creation of a new machine learning model. As a result, the same underlying architecture can be configured to examine very different physical systems. A circuit board may prioritize connector geometry, missing components, or flux residue. A thin film inspection may emphasize boundary behavior, diffusion patterns, haze, or surface contamination. A semiconductor wafer may focus on particles, edge structures, film uniformity, or localized process variation. The objective is not merely anomaly detection. The objective is configurable, physics-anchored measurement that can be governed by domain-specific expectations while maintaining a consistent measurement framework across multiple industries and applications. The demonstrations that follow illustrate how these concepts are applied to real experimental image data. Classical computer vision did not begin with deep learning. Early machine perception systems relied on engineered image processing methods that extracted structure directly from visual signals. Edges, contours, motion, shapes, corners, and textures were analyzed using deterministic mathematical operators rather than learned representations. In many industrial environments, these methods proved highly effective. They enabled measurement of alignment, motion, geometry, and contrast using transparent computational procedures that engineers could inspect and verify directly. These systems established the foundation for machine perception by transforming visual information into structured representations suitable for automation and analysis. However, classical approaches often depended on carefully tuned rules and controlled environments. As visual complexity increased, researchers sought methods capable of learning more flexible representations from data. This transition helped drive the emergence of deep learning and convolutional neural networks. Deep learning introduced a major shift in machine perception. Rather than relying primarily on handcrafted rules, convolutional neural networks learned hierarchical representations directly from data. Early layers responded to edges and textures, while deeper layers encoded increasingly abstract visual patterns. This enabled significant advances in classification, segmentation, detection, and scene interpretation. In industrial inspection, CNNs made it possible to identify complex anomalies that were difficult to capture using manually engineered rules alone. Visualization methods such as feature maps and GradCam also provided partial insight into how learned representations contributed to classification decisions. At the same time, deep learning introduced new dependencies on training data quality, labeling consistency, environmental variation, and model generalization. As machine perception evolved, researchers increasingly explored methods that incorporated physical constraints and simulation-based reasoning into learning systems. This contributed to the emergence of digital twins and physics-informed modeling. In many digital twin architectures, computational models continuously receive information from physical systems and update their representation of system state over time. This created a growing need for machine perception methods capable of producing structured, physically meaningful measurements rather than only probabilistic classifications. The challenge increasingly shifted from recognizing objects within an image to determining whether a measured system continued conforming to its expected modeled state. As a result, directional behavior, persistence, temporal coherence, and physically grounded state representations became increasingly important. This marked a broader transition from recognition-centered perception toward measurement-centered system state analysis. Physics-informed modeling introduced another important evolution. Rather than relying entirely on learned visual correlations, these systems incorporated governing physical behavior directly into the modeling process. Physics-informed neural networks, or PINNs, combined observational data with mathematical constraints derived from differential equations, conservation laws, and simulation frameworks. These approaches became increasingly important in domains where physical consistency mattered as much as prediction accuracy, including manufacturing, energy systems, structural analysis, scientific simulation, and digital twins. In many cases, the objective shifted beyond object recognition toward estimation of evolving system state. Machine perception was no longer limited to identifying visible patterns alone. It increasingly attempted to model how physical systems evolve through space and time. Yet another branch of machine perception evolved along a different path. Instead of emphasizing learned inference or simulation-driven prediction, it emerged from the world of scientific instrumentation and measurable physical fields. The Phocoustic architecture is built around a profile-governed measurement framework. At its core, the platform provides a deterministic execution engine. Domain profiles define the characteristics of specific industries, materials, or application areas, while scenario profiles capture inspection context, geometry, environmental conditions, and operating constraints. These profiles configure measurement behaviors that govern sensitivity, response, and evaluation logic. The resulting PASDE and TDAL outputs generate drift energy fields, localization information, and state conformance measurements. Profile control domains include drift sensitivity, temporal persistence, directional encoding, spectral conditioning, and state conformance evaluation. Additional controls support semantic escalation, illumination adaptation, connector geometry analysis, thin film analysis, noise suppression, and multiscale measurement. Rather than retraining machine learning models for each new application, profiles define how the measurement system behaves. This enables portable, deterministic, and explainable inspection across diverse physical domains. The concepts described throughout this presentation are not limited to theoretical architectures or simulation environments. Phocoustic has been implemented within multiple working prototype apparatus configurations designed to evaluate deterministic physical state measurement across real-world disturbances. Several of these experiments involve disturbances that remain weak, distributed, or near the threshold of ordinary human visibility. Yet within the measurement pipeline, measurable field structure still emerges. One demonstration involves printed circuit board inspection. In this experiment, a duplicate U1 marking was intentionally added to an incorrect region of the PCB surface, while a connector pin on an integrated circuit package was mechanically distorted. To a human observer, both disturbances are visible. However, the importance of the experiment is not simply that the defects can be seen. The importance is that the disturbances generate measurable instability structure relative to a governed reference condition. Within the PASDE architecture, the PCB no longer functions only as an image containing objects. Instead, it becomes a measurable physical state field. Arrow matrix representations revealed localized vector structure associated with both the duplicated surface feature and the damaged connector region. The system was therefore not operating primarily as a conventional object recognition classifier. Instead, physical state divergence was measured directly across the inspection domain. A second demonstration focused on thin film redistribution across a matte asteriglass substrate. A solution containing isopropyl alcohol, dissolved salts, and surface contaminants was distributed across the panel surface. Under static viewing conditions, the resulting perturbations often remained faint or visually ambiguous. However, short toggled image sequences revealed subtle specular redistribution patterns as the film evolved. To a human observer, the changes appear weak and difficult to localize consistently. Within the measurement pipeline, however, structured field behavior begins to emerge. Arrow matrices and instability maps reveal organized response patterns associated with evolving surface state variation. Importantly, measurable field structure emerged before strong object-level visibility. The experiment demonstrated how distributed physical change can become measurable even when conventional object boundaries remain weak or incomplete. A third demonstration examined positional instability near the sensitivity floor of the measurement pipeline. In this experiment, an asteriglass panel reference condition was intentionally shifted by approximately a single pixel relative to the baseline acquisition state. Under ordinary visual inspection, the positional change was nearly impossible to detect reliably with the human eye. Rapid toggled comparison sequences revealed only slight positional instability when alternating between the golden and detect states. Additional null condition experiments were also performed by comparing nominally identical acquisition states in order to characterize the baseline directional response floor of the system itself. Within this near-threshold operating region, low-level directional structure can emerge from extremely small physical, numerical, or acquisition variations. Importantly, however, the intentionally shifted panel condition produced stronger and more organized instability structure relative to the null condition baseline. Within the PASDE and DSE framework, even extremely small spatial deviations generated measurable directional response fields. The resulting arrow matrices revealed coherent instability organization near the threshold of human perceptibility, demonstrating how directional measurement structure can emerge even when visible object-level change remains extremely weak. Across each domain, the system operated through the same measurement-centered architecture. Instability fields were extracted relative to governed reference states. Persistence and coherence behavior were evaluated deterministically, and symbolic field representations were generated from measured physical variation rather than probabilistic object inference alone. Phocoustic approaches inspection as a deterministic measurement problem. Rather than beginning with semantic object classification alone, the system measures physical state variation relative to governed reference conditions. This distinction becomes especially important in experiments involving weak or distributed disturbances. Thin film redistribution, faint wafer ring emergence, and near sub-pixel positional instability may produce visible changes that are difficult to recognize reliably as conventional defect objects. Within the PASDE and DSE architecture, these disturbances instead generate measurable field structure. Arrow matrices and symbolic field representations describe how physical state evolves across space and time, even when object-level boundaries remain weak or incomplete. The objective is not only to recognize what is visible, but also to measure how physical state evolves. This reflects a broader shift in machine perception architecture, from recognition-centered systems designed primarily to identify objects, toward measurement-centered systems capable of describing how physical state changes, stabilizes, and diverges across complex environments. Within this framework, directional structure itself becomes a measurable analytical object. Arrow matrices become physical state artifacts, and symbolic representations become portable measurement structures capable of supporting reproducible inspection workflows across multiple environments and domains. The evolution of machine perception may therefore continue beyond recognition alone, toward systems capable not only of identifying objects, but also measuring how physical state evolves, stabilizes, and transitions across complex physical environments. As industries continue moving toward digital twins, predictive maintenance, and physics-informed modeling, the challenge increasingly becomes measuring whether a physical system remains in conformance with its expected state. The goal is no longer limited to recognizing objects or classifying images. The goal is understanding change. Similar to how microseismic measurements reveal evolving geological conditions, or how AI-generated protein structures provide physically grounded starting points for pharmaceutical research, Phocoustic seeks to transform visual information into structured measurements of state stability and divergence. By focusing on measurable physical change rather than recognition alone, it offers a different perspective on machine perception, one centered on observation, quantification, and the early detection of meaningful change. Phocoustic recognizes a physical change relative to a reference state rather than recognizing objects. Using configurable profiles, it transforms directional variation into structured arrow matrices that represent physical state evolution. The same measurement framework applies across PCBs, thin films, wafers, industrial systems, and scientific instruments, providing a scalable, deterministic architecture for state conformance measurement across diverse domains. And that is the long-term vision of Phocoustic, a common measurement framework for physical state evolution, regardless of scale, domain, or environment.